Have you tried using a DSLR camera to take photos and they just weren't turning out the way that you wanted them to? I'm going to explain the 3 basic functions of a DSLR camera and how to adjust them to get the best pictures possible. According to a short course in digital photography, DSLR stands for Digital Single Reflex Camera. Digital Single Lens Reflex Camera. Most people carry a compact or a subcompact camera because they're easier to handle and they will fit in your pocket or a bag. A medium format DSLR requires a shoulder or a neck strap to carry around. They take more professional photographs and they have more functions and settings for better quality pictures. The functions and settings help to form expressive and creative photos. I'm currently taking my 2nd class in digital photography, and I'm starting my own business for photography, so I have experience in using the basic functions. My first main point will be how to use the aperture and what the aperture is. According to Glenn Gross on January 2019, the aperture is a mechanical device in the lens that regulates the opening to control the quality of light. This is one of the most important settings for taking good photos. The aperture is measured in f-stops. The smaller the f-stop, the larger the aperture setting. The larger the f-stop, the smaller the aperture setting. So that means that if it is a larger aperture, then it's open more in the lens, so it allows more light to come through. If it's the larger f-stop, or it'll be a smaller hole and a smaller opening, allowing less light to flow through. The aperture also controls the depth of field. Depth of field is the amount of the sharpness in a photo. So if you have a smaller aperture, according to a short course in photography, the depth of field increases. So that means that more of the photo is in focus or sharp from further away to up close. If it's a larger aperture, then it's going to create blurriness starting from further away and then coming closer to the camera. So we're going to learn how to adjust that setting. So we'll turn on the camera, which the on button is right here. So we'll turn that on. And then we will switch it to manual mode from auto. That's the M on your camera. Once you get to manual, it'll bring up this screen right here, which is your settings screens. From left to right, I'm looking at it backwards now. From left to right, it'll be the top settings. Oh, now it's not coming on here. Okay, so from left to right, it'll be shutter speed, aperture, and the ISO settings. So there's other settings on here too that are important, but those top 3 are the most important basic functions. So to change the aperture, we'll hit this button, which is the Q inside of a box, and it'll allow us to select anything that's on the screen. So we'll use the left and right arrows to select the aperture, which will be the F followed by numbers. So to select that, we'll hit set, and then it'll take us to the screen that shows us the F numbers. So then you'll just use the left and right arrow to adjust to the aperture setting that you want, and then click select, or set, So now you know how to set the aperture settings on your camera. So my second main point is going to be shutter speed, what it is and how to adjust it on your camera. According to Glenn Gross in January 2019, shutters used to cut off the light that draws on the camera sensor. It's the second most important setting besides aperture. So aperture and shutter go together to be your most important functions. The shutter speed is the timer for how long light hits the sensor. So you can set it at seconds and fractions of seconds. The slower the speed of the shutter, the more exposure that your camera gets. The faster the speed, the less exposure. For darker scenes, you're going to want a slower shutter speed because it's going to require more exposure to actually create the photo. And then the opposite for brighter scenes. Faster shutter speeds are better for moving objects or for taking pictures of people because people move frequently. The slower shutter speeds are going to be better for scenic views or inanimate objects. So now I'm going to show you how to adjust that. So again, we'll be on the menu screen, and you'll see the top at the settings at the top. So we'll hit the Q and the square button, and it'll be the first set of numbers on here, and we'll click set, and then use the arrows left and right to select what our shutter speed should be, and then click set. And that's how you change the shutter speed. So now that we've discussed shutter speed, I'm going to move on to ISOs. So my third main point would be the ISO setting. The ISO tells the camera whether the photo is going to be taken in bright, normal, or a dark situation. So before you set the ISO, you have to determine what kind of situation that you're in. The light differs from inside and outside. So if you're outside where you have natural sunlight, you're going to use a different setting than you would inside where you're using like fluorescent lights and stuff. The ISO has number settings. The lower the number, the more light that you have. So you'll want to use, like if you're outside where it's bright daylight, then you'll want to use a smaller number for your ISO setting. And then the opposite for less light, you'll use a larger number to be able to capture something that's in a darker scene. Unfortunately, the higher the ISO number, the less quality the picture is going to be, so it may come out pixelated. Versus using a smaller number where you're outside where there's more light. So for example, outside with lots of sunlight, you would use a smaller ISO number, whereas if you were at a concert where it was fairly dark, you would use a higher ISO number. So I will show you how to adjust the ISO number. So we'll hit the Q in the square, or there actually is an ISO button, which is right above the set button. So if we hit the Q, then we'll scroll over to the third one on the top and click set, and then use the left and right arrows to adjust the ISO, and then click set. So now I've explained the three basic functions, aperture, ISO, and shutter speeds, and shown you how to adjust them. There's a few things to remember. The aperture measures in f-stops. The larger the f-stop, the smaller the aperture, the less light you let in. The smaller the f-stop, the larger the aperture, the more light you let in. And then also the larger the f-stop, the larger depth of field that you have, and the smaller the f-stop, the smaller depth of field you have. So, and then the fast shutter speed is used for moving objects and people, and the slow shutter speed is used for inanimate objects and scenic views. The ISO tells the camera what the lighting is like, whether it's bright or it's darker. The bright setting, the ISO is at a lower number, and the darker setting, the ISO is at a higher number. Karl Lagerfeld said, "What I like about photographs is that they capture a moment that's gone forever, impossible to reproduce. Now capture the moments with better photos."